Right. One of the things that we do is pick out who's championing South Africa, whose actions are evidence or the manifestation of how they champion South Africa. Of course, it's very linked to the Champion South Africa project that I drive. And so Rehema Isa is certainly one of those people. I certainly think so. She does lots of things. I'm going to leave her to explain who she really is. Rehema, I appreciate your time and thanks for joining me.
I think the correct greeting for me is Salam Alaikum, Ashraf, and what a blessing to be here. Thank you.
I was waiting for you to say that. So, walaikum salam. Absolutely right. I mean, I'm going back to what is it? Your original company. When I first met you on SAFM was I think it was called Habari Media. If I got that right.
Hadithi Media.
Hadithi Media, and I asked you about it. You said, "Well, that's linked to the doings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him." So it's a fascinating journey you've taken, right? But let's then talk about this. How do you champion South Africa? So I'm very keen on that.
Ashraf, that's such a tough question. I think one doesn't sit back in the morning and say, I'm championing, right? I think one wakes up and says, what's the right thing to do? How do I want to make a difference? Where can I make a difference? What skills and talents have I been gifted with? How do I utilize those skills and talents? And where I find people who are also got skills and talents, how do I draw them into my vision and how do I participate in their vision? So I think this notion of championing, sometimes people think it's like an exclusive club of championing, but I think it really is more of people who wake up in the morning and say, I have a mission. God put me on earth for a reason. I have skills and I have talents and I've got ways of thinking that could, not just impact me and my life, but people around me. So I think to answer that, whilst I don't wake up thinking I'm champion, I wake up thinking, how can I use the talents? I want to go peacefully and think that all the talents, all the skills that I was gifted with, I utilize them in some way. And by that utility, I had a purpose and people were impacted and my life was enriched and fulfilled because the broad spectrum of skills and talents, I fully utilize them.
Well, I think you're so right. I mean, that is why when we titled that project Champion South Africa, realized very early on that it's a wonderful play on words because champion is a noun that suggests best in class. And then
Yeah.
champion is also a verb, which is an act. So you champion a cause, right? So you can use that interchangeably. And often people think when we say, like, how do you champion South Africa? It suggests I'm giving you the title of a champion. No, in fact, I'm asking you, what are you striving for? And I think, but often people can do both, right? So as I will then start with a recent event that took place, I think, just before Ramadan for us, was that you tell me, what is it? Women in stature. I lose sight of these names, right? Awards that you were there, and there were like 10 categories. The one category was in entrepreneurship, and by the way, you won that category. And there was an overall category for the absolute women of stature for the year, and somebody by the name of Rehema Isa won that, and I was privileged to be in attendance when you won it.
Mm. Oh, thank you again. That I think is a beautiful accolade, and I think as somebody who does work in different spaces, it's a recognition of again the utility of talents, and the spaces that talent is being used and the impact of that. So for me, Woman of Stature is a recognition of women who are in the world of work and are making an impact not just for themselves but their communities. Winning the Entrepreneur of the Year award, I've always been very quick to say, doesn't mean I'm the richest person. Please, can we categorize that? I think what it means in year 2022 is that despite everything that we've gone through, I still represent I think the word is the Ghis. I represent the soul. I am a microcosm of a number of women who represent the ability and the willingness to wake up and do something, who are not sitting in their laurels and saying things have changed, but are willing to not only identify where that change is possible, but marshal others to focus on that change. And I think I got it not just because of the work that I've done in my current companies, but also during lockdown, starting companies that impact marginalized communities. But I've got local and global implications, particularly right now in the food business.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to leave it to you just to very quickly, like in 3 minutes, maybe highlight the companies or the projects you are involved in now, so we understand it.
Okay, so I'm a strategist at heart, business strategist. So the main company, the overall holding company is Oya Solutions. And we basically do strategy consulting and leadership development. That's at the thrust of it. Because if we're not looking at championing leaders, if we're not looking at cultivating leaders, our conversation has got no basis to start. So we work on what is our vision for tomorrow? How do we help organizations define that? Oya then is the birthing place of our different initiatives. And one of the areas that we knew that we wanted to see change was in women's development on the continent. And that gave birth to Womanomics Africa. Womanomics Africa is a not for profit organization that's aimed at championing or channeling African women's participation in the free trade area, which means we are the conduit for skills development, we're the conduit for insights, and we're also the conduit for defining ecosystems that ensure that more African women are aware of the opportunities on the continent and are better positioned to take part in some of those initiatives because we are a link between government, private sector, and development. Through Womanomics Africa and understanding where what we call economic highways exist, we gave birth to Oya Foods during lockdown. And
Mm,
giving birth to that was an understanding that unless African women were participating in robust value chains in agribusiness, we would continuously be a statistic that says there's 75% of Africa's agricultural workforce is women, but not talking about the economic benefit. And so we designed Oya Foods, which is actually sourcing and retailing foods produced by women farmers, creating an end-to-end women-owned value chain. We are very much about amplifying the voices of African women. And so that gets us involved with Tedx. And we have been, over the last 7 years, responsible for putting 100 voices onto the TED platform, ensuring that women's agency and voice is more evident and heard. And I think, lastly, our latest effort, because one of our TEDx alumni was affected by the floods in KZN, we've started an effort to ensure that the village of Gwanyuswa in KZN gets sufficient relief. What we know and need to evidence is that whilst the problems seem big, focus on one area and try to
mm.
create change and impact in that area. And the area that we are alerting people's attention to is the village of Kwanyuswa in the Valley of a Thousand Hills, that we are directing our relief efforts and galvanizing for food, and basic elements of support, blankets, and even financial support, so that that village can reconstruct and come back into the economy to productively.
And I'm certainly glad to endorse all your work and fabulous work at that, including that call out to support that community that you refer to in KZN, because I think it's that important. And I like the point that if you ring fence one community, you can totally impact on their lives. Now, just to pick up on the TED Talk, the TEDx, right? That we spoke about.
Yeah,
Of course, I've been privileged to have physically been at one of your TEDx's that you, and you're a licensee that you rather modestly haven't even said a word about. But when you got the award, you spoke at length about people finding their voices
yeah.
and linking that to the TEDx. And I'm saying, like, look at that. I mean, look at how this person who I know has used that position to advance other people. I mean, or enhance other people. Tell me about the impact that the TEDx talks have created.
Oh wow, I think it is exciting, Ashraf. I think one, I guess, is Women who's in Gwanyusa. And she's changed the landscape of the rural child. Her TEDx talk was talking about changing the narrative for the rural girl child. She's put hundreds of young girls, not who used to be in traditional rural schools, through aftercare programs. They now have access to good schools, they've access to universities. But she's evolved that to involve local and global organizations, and they're able to now transform the life of a rural child without taking the child out of a rural setting. Now that's impact. So there's no brain drain. You're actually developing within that community. Another example I would say is Notsibo Butsibo, who was a photographer who imagined that her work was only going to stay in the arts, right? And what we're able to do with the TEDx talks is create bodies of knowledge and influence that then live as reference points. and she's now a lecturer in photography in the Durban University of Technology, and she's been able to bridge that gap between the arts, which is photography, and becoming a lecturer in the built environment. What we're able to do with the TEDx talks is to highlight spaces where women are occupying or providing content that allows the world to interact with this content differently. And had that not been the case, we would still assume that those spaces are not to be occupied, or would still relegate some of these conversations to that old fashioned let's mainstream, without saying actually mainstream is here. And how do we take the voices of these women, the works that they're doing, and see how we can shift and change the spaces that they occupy?
Well,
I think for
I
a
think
number of
I think all of the things are incredibly impactful, and sometimes you do it, sometimes you don't. I've certainly I asked you to feel free to tag Champion South Africa and all those projects and all those talks, and we'll gladly amplify that. Now we've got about 2 minutes or so remaining. I mean, two things that I want to just pick up on, right? About your personal purpose. I mean, what is your purpose? Because when people hear like the 10 things you do, they sometimes think your work is your purpose, and I think you're going to say that's not true, right? What is your purpose?
My purpose is to tell stories. I think for a very long time, I grew up reading, and the wonder of stories allowed me to be transported to different spaces and possibilities. And I lament that because we think stories exist in a particular way, we don't interact with them enough. Stories are a way of defining culture, defining identity, creating meaning, creating a direction. And I think that as Africans, we are remiss in being the architects of our stories and relegate them to entertainment, but not as strategic tools for enablement. And so I strive to find innovative ways of infusing story into the world of business, and finding ways of creating that link so that story becomes more visible and less on the sidelines. So I always say I'm a strategist, but at the core of how I deliver strategy is an ability to take what is scientific and make it creative and create that link. I exist to tell stories, to find ways of telling stories so that the African leadership identity or the African leadership signatures become more visible, more prevalent, more accessible, and therefore we can engage with them better and define richer stories of who we are, how we exist, and how we'd like to exist. But importantly, where we would like to go. And so it's not infused based on what other people think Africa is about, but it really is from the soul of how we think. And I think we need to mainstream that. We need to
I
tell
think
our
you're right.
stories.
Yeah. And I mean, people underestimate the power of the narrative. That means that story, in terms of explaining something that's very abstract, is what sticks out. So, a classic case in point. You were the MC at an event a few years ago. I think the African Leadership Magazine event. Our common friend Harva Shafre, who, of course, as you know, lost her husband recently,
Mm,
was directly
I'm sorry.
involved in that. And as the MC, you themed in the theme of Mama. And you see, I can't remember anything else, but I remember that. So that's exactly a manifestation of just how important that is, right? But here's the last thing: people watching you, listening to me, saying like, goodness, I mean, these people are so organized, they're so connected. And they not. What advice would you give someone, not somebody who's succeeded, but somebody who wants to grow as big as you, and they don't think they're anywhere near that now?
Cultivate relationships. I think it's taken me a long time. As an introvert, particularly, it's difficult. I think that be deliberate about the spaces that you occupy, be deliberate about the relationships that you nurture, but be deliberate about your own purpose. Be deliberate about being steadfast. I mean, Ashraf, 6 years ago, when I talk about storytelling, it was discarded. Now I lecture in business schools, local, global business schools, about storytelling in business. Be steadfast about your own beliefs and trust that the gifts that God gave you were there for a reason. And even if nobody looks into it right now, understand the patience of time, that over time, if you are steadfast and you don't walk away from your own true path, others will follow. And when they don't follow, learn to be a follower and learn to learn from those who lead.
And all I can tell you about this feature, where we talk about how people champion South Africa in their own way, is a collector's item, and then will be shared, and I'll pass it on to you as well. Rehema Isa, as always, good chatting to you, and hopefully we'll connect soon. Maybe lunch after Ramadan, not quite now.
After Ramadan, looking forward to it, Ashraf.
Perfect. There we are, Rehema Isa, who's done many things, but the holding company OYA, then Women Nikes Africa, and as I said, a licensee of Tedx. I think Tedx Littleton, if I'm not mistaken, if I've got that right. Okay, we're going to wrap up with understanding or getting an insight into one of those historic mosques that we've asked people to comment on, and we'll do that with a mosque in Chatsworth right after this.